Tonight, we are privileged to have with us Dr. Duane Gish. Dr. Gish is the Senior Vice President Emeritus of the Institute for Creation Research. He frequently travels abroad, gives seminars and lectures on creation science. I have this little bio here I got off the internet. It says that Dr. Gish is arguably the foremost debater of creation science in the world. And he has debated, well, he's been telling us over dinner about some of the people he's debated and some of the confessions they made in debate. And it's been very interesting, along with war stories. We had a good time. Dr. Gish has his bachelor's in chemistry from UCLA, his Ph.D. from UC Berkeley. He spent a total of 18 years in biochemical research with Cornell University Medical College, with the virus laboratory of UC Berkeley, and on the research staff of the Upjohn Pharmaceutical Company. And Dr. Gish has also published approximately 40 articles in scientific journals, besides all the work he's done with creation ministry. So let's welcome Dr. Gish at this time.
Well, thank you very much, Jim. It's a pleasure for me to be with you this evening. I'm happy to have my wife with me. And I want to thank Jim Pamplin. Did I get that right? Pamplin? Now he tells me, you know, that he's actually, his forebears from Spain, and that's a Spanish name. It is Spanish to me. It sounds like Dutch or something like that. But I certainly want to thank him for inviting us to come and all the work that he's done to bring us here, bring us together. As you know, as I've been with the Institute for Creation Research about 34 years. I'm retired. You know what my wife says retirement means? Twice as much husband, half as much money. Well, you just have to put up with it, I guess. But I'm still doing some speaking as I'm requested and so forth and so on. And we, those of us at the Institute for Creation Research, we believe the Bible to be the inerrant Word of God. And we believe God did precisely what he said he did in the book of Genesis. And so we certainly accept the biblical record of creation. Now, furthermore, we are convinced from our scientific research and studies that the scientific evidence comes down heavily in favor of creation. There is no doubt in my mind that it's physically impossible for life to have evolved from chemicals here on this planet, or any other planet as far as that's concerned. And as I will describe, some of the facts from the fossil record convinces me there's no question that evolution has not taken place on this planet. We have powerful, positive evidence supporting our position. Although, you know, the evolutionists control generally our school systems. Thank God for the Christian teachers we do have in those schools, but they're dominated by evolution. We're taught exclusively in our public universities that evolution is the fact, there's no question about it, and so forth and so on. Our newspapers, our television, and everything else completely dominated by the evolutionists. But we have the truth on our side. And you know, let me read just a bit of scripture here. I want to read from I'll find it here in a minute. I want to read from, no, that's on my later, I got something I want to read. I want to read from Romans, from the Apostle Paul. I want to read 3 verses here, beginning at the 18th verse of chapter 1. We read, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who hold the truth in unrighteousness, because that which may be known of God is manifest in them, for God has shown it unto them. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Now you see what the scripture tells us? From the things that God has made, we can know for certain this Godhead, his creation, his power, the very fact that he is our creator, so that, the Bible says, nobody has any excuse. And you know, that's all we do at the Institute for Creation Research. That's all they do here at this creation organization here, is studying the things that God has made. And from the things that God has made, we can know, we can discover, we can be certain of his Godhead, that he is the creator. He has made us, and he is our Lord and Master. We can know that. I am absolutely certain. When these evolutionists stand before God, God will say, you have no excuse. I made it plain to you. You had all of this evidence. You see it and you ignore it. And so we want to emphasize that what we're doing in our research is studying things that God has made. And from that we can know of his existence and his power, and so forth and so on. So this evening I want to be speaking from scientific evidence. That's one thing that our institute has stressed throughout its existence. It's called the Institute for Creation Research. We have been researching and studying all we can learn about the fossil record, thermodynamics, biology, geology, physics, and so forth. Whatever we can learn that will show us God's creation. And I'm going to describe some of that evidence tonight. Of course, we would take days and days and days to describe all of it, but we want to cover some of that. Some of, I think, is the very most important evidence that we have. Now, I want to make clear, contrary to what evolutionists claim, that evolution is not a scientific theory. It is not true, as they claim, that evolution is science and creation is religion. It's not true. Not true at all. But we'll show what we know, what we can establish is that creation and evolution are theories about history. Theories about history are not scientific theories. Now this says nothing about whether creation is true or evolution is true. No, it doesn't say that. What it says is this, that they're not scientific theories because, you see, there were no human observers to the origin of the universe, obviously. There were no human witnesses to the origin of life. There are no human witnesses to the origin of a single living thing. All of these events took place in the unobservable past. They're not repeatable in the present. We don't see apes changing into people. We don't see God creating anything today. So creation and evolution are inferences based upon circumstantial evidence. Now that circumstantial evidence is available. The evidence from the fossil record and the laws that govern this universe and so forth are available. And they, I think, establish beyond doubt the truth of God's creation. Now, there are these people who call themselves theistic evolutionists. They say they believe in God and so forth and so on, but they believe in evolution also. Well, yes, there are these people who are theistic evolutionists. But I'll tell you one thing, There's no such thing as theistic evolution. Evolution is not theistic. What is being taught in our schools, that is by the law, state of California, what is being taught in our universities is this theory of evolution is totally atheistic. God is not involved in any way. Even Darwin said that if God had to be involved in some way in this process, my theory is absolutely worthless. What is being taught to our children is atheism, an atheistic theory. And let me just, so that here we see what was found in one of the biology books. You are an animal that share a common heritage with earthworms. Isn't that must be encouraging to our students? And then in the book by Prentice Hall, book called Biology, says evolution is random and undirected, without plan or purpose. Absolutely. Evolution has no goal, no purpose, nothing. We are the results of random genetic errors. Now here's a statement from Richard Dawkins. He's a British atheist biologist. He's written a lot of books and they've sold millions of copies of this book. He is a rabid atheist. You see what he says here. He says, we are entirely accustomed to ideas that complex elegance is an indicator of premeditated, crafted design. Well, I should say we do. We certainly do. He goes on to say, this is probably the most powerful reason for the belief held by the vast majority of people in some kind of supernatural deity. It took a very large leap of imagination for Darwin and Wallace to see that there is a far more plausible way for complex design to arise out of primeval simplicity. Oh, well, listen to what he said. That Darwin and Wallace had to make a great leap of imagination. Then in other places he tells us that Darwin discovered this process. No, he didn't discover. He had an idea. And here's what this, you see what this man says. He made a great leap of imagination. Well, that's true. I'd agree with that. He made a great leap of imagination. Now, another thing I want to emphasize is that evolution, as I said, is not a scientific theory. Now, you know, you can discuss evolution and creation in scientific terms and so forth and so on and so forth. But they're not scientific theories. They cannot be scientific theories. And you remember in 1981 there was this trial in Arkansas. The Arkansas legislature had passed a law requiring that when origins are discussed in the public schools of Arkansas, that the evidence for both creation and evolution must be included. Up to that time, just evolution was being taught. Now the legislature passed that by overwhelming majority. Well, immediately the ACLU and the atheists came and challenged it in the federal court. And I was there during the trial. I was not part of the trial, but I was there, heard what went on. And I can say one thing, that judge had his mind made up before he ever stepped into that courtroom. There's no doubt about it. His wife sat right behind me, teaching evolution and biology and so forth and so on. But what I wanted to mention the fact, there was a philosopher of science there, Dr. Michael Roos. Now he's written a lot of books on the philosophy of science and so forth, several of which I have in my own library. He was the chief witness for the evolution side at that time. That's 1981. He got on the witness stand and said, evolution is science, creation is religion, it shouldn't be taught in the schools. And he went on much else, and the judge relied heavily upon the testimony of this man. 20 years later, in the year 2000, he published an article in a Canadian newspaper, the National Post. In that, it was a big article, it was 2 pages, and in that article, he related the fact that he was indeed one of the chief witnesses for the evolutionist side during that trial, and so forth and so on. But he said he met a guy by the name of Duane Gish during the trial, and that I had challenged him. I said that if creation is religion, so is evolution. He said I poo-pooed the idea at first, but going home on the airplane, I began to think about it. And I began to think, well, maybe there's something to this. He said that was the reason for much of his research for 20 years. What did he conclude after these 20 years? Remember, he was this leading philosopher of science, the witness for the evolutionist side. The evolutionists quoted him profusely during those years. Well, let's see what he said. This is what he said in that article. Evolution is promoted by its practitioners as more than mere science. Evolution is promulgated as an ideology, as secular religion, a full-fledged alternative to Christianity with meaning and morality. Evolution is a religion. Just recently, I wrote another book on this subject, and he said it's not a question of science versus religion, it's a question of 2 religions. That's what this man, now, he still is a Darwinian evolutionist. His religion is Darwinism and evolution. There's something I don't know about this man. He wants to cling to this atheistic idea. He says that he's still a Darwinian evolutionist, but he's an honest Darwinian evolutionist. He has come out and laid the facts down. How true it is. And yet, these evolutionists, if a school board is going to discover that a school board is going to introduce the evidence for creation along with evolution, the evidence for creation along with the evidence for evolution, the ACLU and the atheists would be right there telling that school board, look, you do this and we're going to sue. You can't do that. And of course the school board say, well, it's going to cost us $1 million in order to do this, so we better just quit. But this man made it very plain. There's no question about it. If I had time, I could quote a number of sources about evolutionists expressed the view that evolution is going to replace God, you see, as to our guide and so forth in the future. It is definitely a religion. Now, evolutionists claim, well, evolution is such a well-established theory. There's no doubt that evolution, this theory of natural selection, that solves the problem. Well, you know, no matter how complex something, so utterly complex, you just know God had to create it. They'll say, oh, natural selection, that's it. Natural selection took care of it. Well, there's no truth to that at all. But there's more and more scientists, while they're out, are evolutionists. They're not going to give up on evolution. That's their religion. That's what they believe. But they are turning against Darwinism, the idea that evolution occurs by random genetic errors or mistakes, mutation, and so-called natural selection. You see the idea being that a plant or animal has a mutation. Most of them are bad, or I believe they're all bad. But the evolution says, well, almost all are bad, but once in a while there's a good mutation. And it conveys some advantage for this individual. There's a competition, struggle for existence. And as a consequence, the individual that receives this good mutations will have an advantage. And after thousands and thousands of generations, they will replace the original, eliminate it. That's called natural selection. That's what this theory is all about. More and more scientists are turning against this and say there's just no way that could do what it's supposed to do. One of these scientists is the Swedish scientist, Dr. Soren Lovetrop. I heard him speak a number of years ago in Jerusalem at Hebrew University. Both he and I had been invited there to participate in a seminar on creation and evolution. He was an evolutionist, no question about it. But I immediately realized when I heard him that he was not a Darwinian. Couldn't believe that. Well, he published a book in 1987 called Darwinism, The Refutation of a Myth. In that book, he described the Darwinian evolution from its beginning up to the present day. He described why he couldn't accept it, and then he described his own ideas about evolution, which is something like a big jumps in evolution. A reptile laid an egg, and a bird was hatched from the egg. Must have been a tremendous shock to Mama Reptile. But he and a number of other scientists have accepted this idea. But he published this book. Let me read. Now remember, evolution, Darwinian evolution, is taught as fact in our schools. It's taught as fact in our universities. I had almost 300 debates with evolutionists. And every evolutionist I ever debated, everyone was a Darwinian evolutionist. Let's see now what this scientist, this evolutionist, has to say about what is being taught in our schools as fact, chiseled in stone. Let's see what he has to say. In that book, he says, I believe that one day the Darwinian myth will be ranked the greatest deceit in the history of science. Now I want you to think about that. If what this man says is true, he's an evolutionist. He says what they're teaching our kids, this Darwinian evolution, is the greatest deceit in the history of science. Well, we as creation scientists certainly agree with that. Now, we don't believe that these evolutionists are deliberately deceitful or dishonest. We're not saying that. But they have been deceived, or they have deceived themselves into believing something that is completely wrong. We would be, and no, anybody says, these evolutionists say, oh, you know, and we know evolution is true and so forth, and we have the mechanism and all that. No, they don't. And this man is certainly a testimony to that. Now, I want to give some of the evidence from the fossil record. Now, if evolution is true, and life began as a little microscopic organism billions of years ago, and nothing much happened, as evolutionists believe, for several billion years, and finally it suddenly began to diversify, and diversified, and became a multicellular organism, which then spread out, diversified into a great variety of complex invertebrates, which then evolved into fish and on up the evolutionary ladder to man. Over hundreds of millions of years of time. And remember, the evolutionist says the successful organism is the one that reproduces in large numbers. Such large numbers, he replaces the original. So every one of these stages in the evolutionary scheme, all these in between, they would have very large populations. They would have to replace the original. So they'd be a very large population. They'd exist for millions of years of time. Therefore, there would be more than an adequate time to produce these transitional forms, fossils of intermediate, showing truly that one kind changed into another. There should have billions and billions and billions of these things. There shouldn't be any question. I wouldn't be here on this platform. We wouldn't have creationist organizations. On the other hand, if creation is true, Dogs have always been dogs, and cats have always been cats. And you know, have you ever seen a dat? A cross between a cat and a dog? No, I've never seen a cat, a dat, anything like that. No, that doesn't happen. They're distinct kinds. So we have these distinct kinds. Now, variation within the kinds. Many races of people. Many varieties of finches that Darwin saw in the Galapagos Islands. Many varieties. But we don't find the basic types. One kind changing into another basic kind. That would be the case if creation were true. Well, let's look at some of this fossil record. Now, here we see the reconstruction of some of the creatures that are found in Cambrian rocks. Cambrian rocks are merely rocks scattered all around the world that have fossils of trilobites and certain kinds of brachiopods. When you see that, the paleontologist immediately says it's a Cambrian deposit. They believe these Cambrian deposits, that it's the deposition began. Now they say about 530 million years, 530 million years ago. They used to say it was 600 million years. Now they say it's 530 million years. Somehow they lost 70 million years. What? 70 million years among friends. And okay, now in these deposits, we have these complex invertebrates. We have fossils of brachiopods, anemones, clams, snails, trilobites, sponges, jellyfish, and many others. They are indeed complex. Now, here on this next slide, we see fossil trilobite. And the next slide, we see the eye of a trilobite. About 600 limbs in each eye. Now let's see something about this eye. Since the limbs of the trilobite eye are composed of inorganic crystalline calcium carbonate, they are preserved and fossilized in the eyes. You see, when we pass away, immediately our eye decays. But not in this case, because that lens is composed of inorganic crystalline calcium carbonate. So the lens are still there. And scientists were able to study the optics of the trilobite eyes. They were astounded to discover that the trilobites had utilized Fermat's principle, Abbe's sign law, Snell's law of refraction, and the optics of birefringent crystals to construct eyes with perfect, undistorted vision. Perfect vision underwater also requires each lens to be double. Guess what? Each one is a double lens. Now, okay, here we have the testimony of these incredibly complex eyes. Having somehow devised the laws and principles of optics to construct these eyes. Now, the next question is, could random, accidental, blind changes in DNA molecules, that is extremely rare, hypothetical good mutations, enable the trilobite to invent and utilize Fermat's principle, Abbe's sign law, Snell's law of refraction, and the optics of birefringent crystals in order to know how to construct eyes with perfect, undistorted vision? Did other genetic mistakes enable the trilobite to know he had to have double lens underwater for undistorted vision? Okay, now you've got to have an incredibly complex eye. Now, but more than that, of course, the blind process of evolution would have to invent the complex biochemical process that converts light into a current of electrons. You see, we receive the light comes into our eyes. Now, that light isn't turned around and sent to the brain. No, it's converted to a stream of electrons. Now, while he was evolving all those complex ways and means to contract that, to make the perfect eye, he would also have to solve the problem of changing the photons into a stream of electrons. That would also have to evolve. But more than that, of course, at the same time, he had to evolve all those tens of millions of optic nerves. Really, more than that. And this is really a stunning thing. He had to evolve a brain that had the ability to convert that stream of electrons into an image and do it in a fraction of a second. Now that trilobite sitting there, and if there's a predator coming forward, he has to know that right now in a split second. He can't take the vision or the element of a vision into his eyes and spend a couple of weeks converting it into an image. He's got to do it immediately. Or if he sees some choice food, immediately he has to know it and where it is and so forth and so on. He has to do that right now. So the brain would not only have to evolve this ability to change the stream of electrons into an image, it have to be done in a fraction of a second. Do you know the human brain can process the amount of information coming from our eyes in 1/10 of a second? That would require a Cray supercomputer to do. Think about that. You look over here. Now look over there. Look up here. Look down there. Look to your next friend on one side and on the other side. Immediately, you have an image. If there's a room with 100 people and your wife or husband walks in, immediately you recognize that person. What an incredible ability. And that trilobite had that ability. Now, one of the scientists who studied the eyes of the trilobite was Dr. Levisetti. And here's a statement by this I assume an atheist, an evolutionist. See what he had to say about that. He said, we have no record of this beginning. Yeah, that's right. Boom, boom. Right? Bang. There's the trilobite. There's no ancestors of any trilobite. No, nothing showing that the trilobite evolved from anything. That's what he says. We have no record of this beginning. However, we infer that a tremendous evolutionary process must have occurred prior to the first recorded occurrence of trilobites in sedimentary rocks. In fact, trilobites appear suddenly in the fossil record at the very beginning of the Cambrian period, some 600 million years ago, when they had already reached a full degree of development and differentiation. Compound eyes were already present in the earliest trilobites. What is he saying? That trilobite suddenly burst on its, right there in the trilobite, in the Cambrian. There are no trace of any evolutionary ancestry. He said they were all complete. And that's true of all of those complex invertebrates. They all appear without a trace of any evolutionary ancestry. Ever since Darwin. See, Darwin was aware of this problem, this so-called, what they call it, the Cambrian explosion. And ever since Darwin, evolutionists have been searching those rocks, hoping and expecting to find evolutionary ancestors. They have found none. Let me give you the testimony of an evolutionary biologist to that fact. Douglas Fatuma, his book Evolutionary Biology, he said, now, phyla, these different creatures are so different from one another, they're placed in separate phyla. They're so basically different. He says it is considered likely that all the animal phyla became distinct before or during the Cambrian, for they all appear fully formed without intermediates connecting one phylum to another. Evolution is dead in the water. This settles the matter. The phylum, these different basic groups, what does he say? There are no transitional forms. None whatsoever. One of my debates was at Reading University in England. I was debating a well-known paleontologist there, and so interesting what he had to say. He said that in preparation for the debate, he went down to the Natural History Museum in London and talked to a paleontologist down there. And he said, what the paleontologist told him, he said, now, in your debate with Gish, don't mention fossils, or he'll massacre you. Now, that was quite a confession, wasn't it? And I was amazed that he was willing to tell the audience that very fact. Really amazing. And he did say this. He said, look, I'll admit we have no transitional forms between phyla. I said, well, look, this debate's over with. I mean, there's no doubt that evolution is not taking place. You cannot have these huge gaps, this discontinuity. Evolution requires continuity, but you have these massive discontinuities. There's no way, no information at all where these complex invertebrates came from. They all disappear suddenly, fully formed. Billions times billions times billions of fossils of these things are available, but no transitional form. And furthermore, supposedly one or more of these invertebrates evolved into fish. Fish are vertebrates like you and me. They have internal skeletons, very different. Now imagine, you see, maybe some worm or some clam or something like this had to evolve into a fish. Now that would certainly take tens of millions and millions of years, maybe 100 million years, something like that to take place. And it'd be all of these intermediate stages going from a worm or a clam or a snail or whatever, all these intermediate stages leading up to a fish. And each one of these intermediate stages was superior to the other one, the preceding one, and reproduced in larger numbers, so they'd have huge numbers of these intermediate stages. We have truckloads of the intermediates in our museums. As a matter of fact, we don't have any. Every major kind of fish that we know anything about appears in the fossil record fully formed with no trace of any ancestors or intermediates leading back to an invertebrate. Dr. Arthur Strahler, an evolutionist, he published an anti-creationist book. And he was critiquing my books on the fossil record. And when he came to the fish, he said, Gish is right. He said, every one of these major kind of fishes appears fully formed. We don't have any ancestors for these creatures. We have no transitional forms leading back to an invertebrate or anything like that. He says it's true. He said every paleontologist would have to answer in unison, nolo contendere. Nolo contendere is admission of no defense. He's saying we don't have any defense. It's true. Now, just 1 minute. It is not physically possible for some invertebrate or invertebrates evolve into fish and not leave a trace. That's physically impossible. There's no question that evolution is not taking place on this planet. Why talk about anything else? You know, when I debate and some of these fellows start talking about this or that, I say, no, wait a minute. Let's go back to the Cambrian. Let's go back to the fish. We've settled the question. There is no evidence for evolution. Evolution is not taking place on this planet. Oh, they they claim they have some transitional forms. They're always questionable and so forth and so on. But they'll parade these around. But here, listen, there is no excuse for anybody to believe in evolution. Fossil record shows beyond doubt it hasn't taken place on this planet. Now, of course, there's much else, or there's some of the fishes we see, they do appear in huge numbers. Now, here's marine reptiles. They are extinct today. The only one still alive is the turtle, but we have their fossils. In my book on dinosaurs and in my fossil book, I give the reason why we believe these things became extinct. We believe they became extinct subject to the flood because of tremendous changes that took place on this earth at that time. But in any case, they are. We have the fossils. Here's the ichthyosaur, a very fish-like creature, and you and I would look at that and say, well, it's a fish. No, it's not a fish. It was a reptile. What about it? You see some animal, some reptile on the land? I know, I guess somehow he got into the water and he liked it there and he stuck around long enough and evolved into these creatures. That means his feet and legs had to change into paddles. All these other changes had to take place. Oh, we must have an enormous number of transitional forms. Sure we do. We must have. We've got fossils of these creatures. We certainly have some fossils of the transitional form. You know what? We don't have one. And evolutionists say that. They admit it. We have no transitional forms. Every one of these things appears fully formed, just as we see them here. What about the flying reptiles? They're also extinct. Well, we have their fossils. And these creatures, the fourth finger supported a wing membrane. Now, evolutionists must believe that at one time there was some creature running around on the ground, a reptile, a land reptile, and a mutation occurred and his fourth finger got just a wee bit longer. And somehow it conveyed survival values. Now, I don't have the slightest idea how that could be, so he replaced the original. And then he had another, after some hundreds of thousands of years or something, had another mutation, and the finger got a little bit longer, and a little bit longer, and a little bit longer, a little bit longer, a little bit longer. And all finally, he had the very long wing. Of course, at the same time, other mutations had to produce the wing membrane, the flight muscles, and all these other systems and so forth to create this creature. And now, you know, it makes you wonder, right, how in the world would that creature ever get off the ground? Let us say he had 10% wings. Obviously he couldn't fly, but he couldn't run any longer either. He'd be goodbye Charlie. He'd become extinct. He'd be caught and eaten by other creatures. When you have the complete organism, as we see here, yes, certainly he can fly. You know, in the early 40 or 50 years ago, they were telling us that these creatures were very poor flyers. They had to get up on a cliff and jump off the cliff in order to fly. That's what they told us. Really, it's a no joke. But they've studied these things now for many years, and they conclude they were very, very powerful flyers. They certainly were poor flyers at all. Robert Bacher, I like what he said in his book, this evolutionist, Robert Bacher, he said, these creatures, there's no ancestors or anything. He says it's just like, you know, Athena in Greek mythology. Athena popped out of the mind of Zeus, just like that. He says that's just the way it looks like for these creatures. They're just like Athena popped out of the mind of Zeus. They all just suddenly appear. There's no record whatsoever of any evolutionary ancestors or intermediate for these things whatsoever. Now, evolutionists say, oh, now wait a minute, we have Archaeopteryx. Now, they have to admit they have no flying intermediate for the flying reptile, none for insects. They have nothing between an insect with no wings and an insect with wings. Nothing, no intermediate whatsoever. And the bat was a flying mammal, absolutely no ancestors, no intermediates, but they claimed that Archaeopteryx, well, had some features that were reptilian. However, we see that it was a bird. It had the basic form and pattern of the avian wing. It had feathers identical to the feathers of modern flying birds. It had perching feet, it had a bird-like skull, and other features. But it had this long tail, it had a few other features. It had teeth they claim were reptilian. So it showed that, this bird had evolved from some reptile, something like that. Well, it's true that they had some features that were similar to those found in reptiles, but that's not surprising. You and I have some features that are, we find in reptiles too. Our teeth, they have teeth and we have teeth. But it doesn't show that we evolved from those things at all. Now, in the last few years, they claim they found birds down in China, and also they found dinosaurs that had feathers, or proto-feathers, showing that dinosaurs evolved into birds. Now, a lot of evolutionists believe that birds evolved from dinosaurs. The ornithologists, the experts on birds who are evolutionists, they don't agree. These experts on birds believe that they have powerful evidence that birds did not evolve from dinosaurs. From their study, the fact is, they've discarded some of these dinosaurs they claim to have feathers. Now they admit they're not feathers at all. But what these scientists, evolutionists, Alan Fiducia, University of North Carolina, Larry Martin of the University of Kansas, Doris Olson of the Smithsonian, these ornithologists are claiming that what we have over there are birds, fossils of birds, or fossils of non-flying birds, and dinosaurs, but nothing with intermediates, no feathers intermediate or something like that. And these guys are experts. I have some of the articles with me, published powerful evidence that birds did not evolve from dinosaurs. Some years ago, the National Geographic published a tremendous article on this fossil they found over there in China. Here it was. It was a dinosaur or something like that with feathers. There's no question about it. And they had that great big article and all these statements from the scientists involved and so forth. So they said this is positive proof that birds evolved from dinosaurs. It was shown to be a fake of some smart Chinese farmer had taken the front end of a bird and the back end of a dinosaur and glued them together. And the people didn't even detect that until it was finally shown by others. Tremendous embarrassment to the National Geographic. I think there's no question about it. When somebody wants to argue with me about Archaeopteryx or something like that, I just take them back to the story about the Cambrian and the fish and so forth and so on. Well, we'll have to hurry along here. What about human origins? Well, this is the evolutionary story. We go from the monkey to these creatures here, going from the apes right on up to man. Now, of course, there'd be many intermediate stages. Now, evolutionists claim they have found some evidence of these intermediates, but always it's questionable, very fragmentary, and so forth and so on. And I've been told that what the state of California has done, because this evidence for human evolution is so messed up and everything else, that they're told not to teach that anymore. But anyhow, I want to mention just some evidence just from one creature who's been the prime creature in evolutionary stories for some years, and that's the Australopithecus, Australopithecines, first found in South Africa in 1924. The name means southern ape. Here's the skull discovered by Dr. Louis Leakey and his wife in East Africa In 1959, Dr. Leakey claimed, although it's grossly ape-like, the teeth were somewhat human-like, therefore it's on its way to becoming human. We see the sagittal crest on top, typical of the apes, and massive eyebrow ridges. The brain is about 1/3 of the human, and so forth and so on. Now later, Donald Johanson, an American paleontologist, discovered a fossil in 1973 of a female, and about 40% complete. And he claimed that although she was sort of ape from the neck up, she walked upright in a human manner. He named her Lucy. Ladies and gentlemen, please meet Lucy. Now, more recently, they've been able to reconstruct the skull from the creatures, and we see it is ape. I mean, the skull, it has the jaw of an ape, the teeth of an ape, the face of an ape, the brain is about 30% of the human, and all of these creatures had long curved fingers and long curved toes. Now you don't use long curved toes to walk around on the ground. You use long curved fingers and long curved toes to swing from branch to branch. Furthermore, in more recent years, it's been established that these creatures were knuckle walkers. They walked on their knuckles the same way the other apes, the gorilla and the chimpanzees walked. Now, if they were knuckle walkers, and if they swung from tree to tree, and branches and so forth, they did walk upright in a human manner. No question about it. Now, Dr. Ocknard, a very famous paleontologist and anatomist, he studied these creatures for quite a few years, and this was his conclusion. He says the Australopithecines, known over the last few decades from Olevi and Sternfochtein and so forth and so on, are now irrevocably removed from a place in the evolution of human bipedalism, possibly from a place in a group any closer to human than the African apes, and certainly from a place in the direct human lineage. Now that is by an evolutionist who has studied these things for years and years and years. And that was his conclusion. And Lord Zuckerman, a very famous British anatomist at the University of Birmingham in England, he had a scientific team that rarely numbered less than 4. He studied fossils of these creatures for 15 years with that scientific team. And he was studying fossils of these creatures supposedly 1 to 2 million years younger than Lucy. Now that's an evolutionary assumption. We don't assume those assumptions at all, but that's what the evolutionists assume. According to what they say, what he was studying was supposed to be a couple million years younger than these other fossils. And what was his conclusion? Now, I know that this quote is about 30 years old or something like that, but Lord Zuckerman had studied these Australopithecines very carefully for years, and others, and this was his conclusion. No scientist could logically dispute the proposition that man, without having been involved in any act of divine creation, that is, if we exclude the possibility of creation, then the man evolved from some ape-like creature in a very short space of time, speaking in geological terms, without leaving any fossil traces of the steps of the transformation. What is Lord Zuckerman saying? There's no trace in the fossil record, really, no adequate trace whatsoever, showing that people had evolved from the apes. Now, another thing he said in this same book, he said, this search for man's fossil ancestor, why there's no science in it at all. No science in it at all. I agree with that. But why would he say it? He's an evolutionist. Let me give you a few examples. Here's a picture I took in the San Diego Museum of Land, about 35, 40 years ago. I think 35 years ago. Here we see this creature. Now listen, isn't that positive proof of the evolution of man from an ape? When you stand there and you look at this creature, why look at him? He's not an ape. He's not a man. He's intermediate and walking erect in a human manner. My, I wonder how many thousands and thousands of school children and others were convinced by this model. Now, at that time, of course, they didn't know. The only thing they had of this creature was a few pieces of the jaw and a few teeth, and that was all. And using their preconceived ideas and so forth, and belief in evolution, this is what they came up with. Well, later on, they had additional material, which allowed a much more accurate conclusion. Here we see the present day material of the Ramapithecus, and here's the skull of an orangutan, a modern ape. Compare it to the orangutan. Why, it's the same. It's the same. And no scientists, Pilbeam and others who's claiming that this was an intermediate to an ape and man are saying now, no, we were mistaken, we were misled by our preconceived ideas. As Ramapithecus was merely same as an orangutan. There's what he really looks like. And you compare the model to the orangutan, and you see this is what he really looked like, and here's what they claim that he looked like. No wonder Lord Zuckerman said there's no science in this field of law. Then in about 1912, he found some bones near the village of Piltdown, a skull and a jaw. And from that they constructed Piltdown Man. Now the jawbone was quite ape-like, but the teeth appeared to be human-like. And the skull was quite man-like, but they thought they could see these primitive features, so they put all this together, and he was the famous Piltdown Man. And the world's greatest authorities, the consensus, not all agree, but there's a consensus that this creature was a human ancestor until the 1950s, when it's shown to be a fake, a hoax. Someone had taken this jawbone from a modern ape, a human skull, had treated them with chemicals to make them look old, had altered the teeth to make them look human-like, planted the bones in the gravel, and fooled the world's greatest authorities. And it is amazing how many human-like characteristics those experts could see in that modern ape jaw, and how many ape-like characteristics those experts could see in that human skull. They weren't there at all. This is what they wanted to believe. This is what they thought they should find, you see. And it turned out to be a complete fraud. Then quickly, we have Nebraska Man. Was one tooth found in western Nebraska in 1924. And it's a very exciting discovery by evolution, because they thought in that tooth they could see a transition between an ape and a man. And they call this, it became known as Nebraska Man. And the Illustrated London News published a picture of the Nebraska Man based upon the ideas of the scientists. Here we have him. There's the man. There's his wife. There's the tools they were making. And there were animals they had domesticated. All based upon one tooth. Isn't science a fascinating subject? As Mark Twain said, you get such a wholesale production of conjectures from such a trifling investment of facts. And that is what happened, because several years later, as they found additional material, it turned out he was neither an ape-like man nor a man-like ape. He was a pig. A pig's tooth. And then finally, we have the Neanderthal people. This is the model of the Neanderthal man they had in our museums for 100 years or so, and now, but they've discovered evidence, I think, very conclusive evidence that these people were not like this. They didn't walk stooped over like that. They say that they had rickets and they had other diseases which caused them to look rather primitive. This is the model I received from the American Museum of Natural History a number of years ago. Certainly looks human-like to me. There is still a dispute among evolutionists. Were the Neanderthal people, did they intermarry? Were they part of the human race? Or were they completely separate? But I think there's no question about it. They were fully human. They buried their dead and many other things which were done by the human. And I believe what we have here is we have fossils of apes, fossils of monkeys, and fossils of people. No intermediates at all. Now, let me introduce a statement by a well-known paleontologist, Dr. Colin Patterson at the British Museum of Natural History. He was a leading paleontologist there in that great museum. He published a book called Evolution. A friend of mine visited London and purchased a copy of the book. Now, and he read it, of course, and Dr. Patterson had invited comments from the readers. So my friend wrote to Dr. Patterson, said, Dr. Patterson, I enjoyed your book very much. But it would have been helpful if in your book you had included actual examples of transitional form. Perhaps you could even have an artist illustrate what you think these things look like. Dr. Patterson wrote back to my friend, thanked him for the letter. Then he made the following statement. I fully agree with your comments on the lack of direct illustration of evolutionary transitions in my book. If I knew of any, fossil or living, I would certainly have included them. Ladies and gentlemen, here you have an evolutionist, a paleontologist, sitting among one of the greatest collection of fossils in the world. And that is what he said. There is an honest evolutionist, you see. No question about it. And he said, well, you suggested I'd have an artist to illustrate these things. He said, where would he get the information from? I couldn't supply it. And that would be artistic license, he said. Well, certainly, I'm so glad for this man. And he came over to the United States and gave some lectures. And it was just tremendous. This man, an evolutionist, pointed out all the flaws, all the failings of evolution. Now, I'm going to introduce a little bit of humor. You know, evolutionists believe that man evolved from ape-like creatures. Not quite all. Some do not believe that. Some say that the apes evolved from man. They say, look, we have features that are more primitive than those found in apes, so it's the other way around. We wrote to one of these fellows and we asked him, do you really believe this? He wrote back and said, yes, I do. Well, that's just an astounding suggestion. I thought I better get a second opinion. So I went to the San Diego Museum of Man, and I went to the San Diego Zoo, and I talked to this little orangutan. And I said to him, little fellow, do you realize that some evolutionists are telling us that you came from people that may have looked like me? Let's see his reaction. You see, his eyes popped out, his hair stood on end, and he said, no way would I ever come from anything that looked like you. Well, I have to agree. I don't believe apes came from people, and I don't believe people came from apes. Some of my ancestors may have hung by the neck, but none of them ever hung by the tail. So, I think I will close the fossil record with this statement. Evolution is the substance of fossils hoped for, the evidence of links unseen. Now, I know it's getting late, but I have one thing else I want to present, and I'm going to do it really quickly. You know, we have this ID movement, the intelligent design movement. Now, these people are brilliant scientists. They're outstanding. We love what they're doing. We sell their books. We don't agree with all of them. Somehow I wouldn't. So, but these guys are tremendous. And evolutionists are just trying to brush off these intelligent design people. Now, these people will not name the creator or the designer. They won't do that. That's where, oh, we don't think that's right at all. Name who it is, the God. It's our God of the Bible. But they're doing a great job. And we've been talking about intelligent design for many, many years. Intelligent design, you see, demonstrates this tremendous complexity, so utterly complex it could not have evolved by Darwinian evolution, but if you remove only one part, the whole thing collapses. You've got to have everything there. So the evidence, you see, is intelligent design. Had the result of intelligent design, and of course, that requires a designer. And that's the God of the Bible. Now, I want to use one example here. I've used this in many of my debates. The evidence of metamorphosis. Metamorphosis, you know, the frog lays eggs, out comes a tadpole, has, you know, it absorbs oxygen from the water, and so forth and so on. Then it goes through metamorphosis and becomes a frog. Incredible change. Well, I want to use the monarch butterfly for my example. I won't describe some of the incredible things about this little creature. We just don't have time. But I want to point out the fact. The female lays eggs. Out of the egg, of course, comes the caterpillar. Now this caterpillar, he has mouth parts for eating leaves and legs for crawling. That's all he does. He just crawls around all day long. And eating, crawling around. That's all he does. Just crawls around and eats leaves. Now, if I was an evolutionist, I would suppose some millions of years ago, they got tired of this. And they look up there and you just see things flying around. Oh, it looks so wonderful, it's so much fun, and you go all over the world. All I can do is just crawl around and eat leaves. And so they want to become a flying creature. Now, I didn't say they want to become a butterfly. No one has ever seen a butterfly. Butterfly didn't exist at that time, you see. But he had some way. He thought maybe he could get around this problem. And after a few molts, he comes to this final stage. And then he makes one last molt. He attaches himself to some firm surface. And then he goes in this J shape. And he makes this last molt. Gets rid of his eyes. Gets rid of his legs and so forth and so on. And they tell me that from this stage to the next stage requires less than 3 minutes. There we have the chrysalis. Now, in that chrysalis there's a little heart beating, and the rest of the material looks like green chili. Now here's the problem for the evolution, insurmountable problem. How would evolution convert a caterpillar into a chrysalis? Remember, it happens by mistakes, genetic errors. And each mutation brings about only a slight change. If the change is really significantly big or great, it never survives. Only those slight changes, good mutations, survive. So, how would evolution know you need a chrysalis? How would evolution know how to make one? Evolution is stupid. Evolution doesn't know a thing. It's absolutely blind. You know. And it would take an enormous amount of time for it to evolve all the new genes, thousands of new genes, that would be able to construct a chrysalis. It's impossible. Evolution could not do that. There's no way you take Darwinian evolution, what it says, and you take this process, what it is, and try to put the two together. You can't do it. Now, however, we do have the chrysalis. Absolutely essential for the life cycle of the butterfly. Now, of course, there's a tremendous problem. I mean, there's a real big problem. How would evolution program that jelly-like material to become a butterfly? The butterfly has no relationship to a caterpillar whatsoever. It's an incredible creature with mouth parts for sucking nectar and wings for flying and all that sort of thing. Totally different. And supposedly It had to get there a little bit at a time from this chrysalis. Why, that chrysalis would dry up and blow away in 3 or 4 or 5 days. There is no way that evolution could ever do that. Now, many times I presented this challenge to evolution. Please explain to this audience how this could happen by evolution. Not one has ever responded to my challenge. I've been to the University of California, the Davis campus, a number of times. And I became acquainted with the head of the zoology that he's acting head when I knew him, Dr. Shapiro. He came down to San Diego to give a lecture on butterflies. That was his life work. That's his research, butterflies. I went over to hear the lecture. It was interesting. It's all about butterflies. It didn't have anything to do with evolution. And after the lecture, he said he was going to get on a bus and go up to someplace north of San Diego to spend the night. And I said, Dr. Shapiro, don't do that. I'll drive you up there. So we had some time together and got well acquainted. And actually, I debated him earlier up in Northern California. All he wanted to talk about was theology and philosophy and all that. Well, in this lecture there at UC Davis, he was in the audience. Now, I challenged some young professor to explain how evolution could do this. He said, well, I'm not an ornithologist, I don't have any idea, but Dr. Shapiro, he's in the audience tonight. Maybe he could explain. So Dr. Shapiro, way up there in the balcony, and he stood up and we exchanged a few words of greeting, and then he said this. He said that we used to believe the caterpillar came first and then the butterfly. But now, he says, we believe it's more reasonable that the butterfly came first and then the caterpillar. But, he said, we have no way to explain that either, he said. If I put him in the audience and told him what to say, he couldn't have done a better job for me. The expert on butterflies had to say, no, we have no way. And the book on insects by Time Life, published this book. The scientists discussed this process of metamorphosis, said it was a miraculous process, and they had no idea how it came about. But you see, it does take place. We see the developing butterfly, and then it breaks out of the cocoon or chrysalis, and then he pumps the fluid from his tummy into his wings, and dries, and then we much more we have on our butterfly. You see, there are multiplied examples of something like this that evolution could not possibly explain. Now, evolutionists might say, oh, of course, we don't know everything. We'll never know everything. Listen, it's not what we don't know that troubles me. It's what we do know. And we know this process. We know the theory of evolution. And you can it's impossible to put them together. You see, only when it's complete and it functions. That creator was the God of the Bible, master engineer. I just want to close quoting from chapter 4, verse 11 of the book of Revelation. Thou art worthy, O Lord, to receive glory and honor and power, for thou hast created all things, and for thy pleasure they are and were created. Why do we give God honor and glory and power? Because he has created us. He created this universe. He created you and I. The very reason that we can exist is because God has created us. And he did much more than that. He has sent his Son, the Lord Jesus Christ, to this earth to preach the good news of the gospel. And then he did something. He did something for you. And he did something for me that we could not do for ourselves. He took upon himself our sins and bore those sins on the cross of Calvary. There he died and shed his blood. But you and I, when we accept him as our Savior, we know he is the Son of God, we know that he died for us, and we accept that, then we have eternal life. Jesus Christ, our Savior. Thank you very much. Is it too late for questions, or you want to have questions?
If you're game,
Now, let me say this. Yeah, sorry, let me say this. If you want to get up and leave at any time, don't hesitate. Go right on out. I understand. You may have babysitters, you may be tired, you've had it right up to here, now you like to get out of here. Please feel free to do so. But if you have some questions you think I might be able to answer, I'll try my best, then I'd be very glad to stay and answer your questions. So we have you stand up for about 5 minutes, did you say?
we have restrooms in the back and some tables.
Oh, you do have book tables back there. Oh, I didn't mention that, and I'm glad you mentioned. You have books for sale? Got any in my books back there? Don't hesitate to get up and leave. Ladies and gentlemen, if you'd rather leave, please do.
You have a 5-minute break, and we'll come back in 5 minutes. When we gather, you can ask questions.
All right, somebody have a question?
Dr. Gish, it seems that the whole scientific community's been turned upside down on its ear with the unlocking of the DNA molecule. Why does biology still tenaciously cling so much to the evolutionary model?
Yes. Now, it is true that what we're seeing in human genome today and the genome of these other creatures.
Microphone.
That's his wife. She can scold him like that.
You be quiet. The question was, with all this thing we're learning in DNA and so forth and so on,
Much of the scientific community is, kind of dropping evolution except for biology.
Well, I tell you, these people are going to stick tenaciously to evolution. Most of them will not give up. It doesn't make like this evidence I present from the fossil record here tonight, just like that Strahler who wrote the book about fish and said, well, we have to answer nolo contendere. This guy just went on with an evolution. And what we're learning from this studies of DNA and all this, comparing the human genome, that is, the human genetics to chimpanzee and so forth and so on, the evolutionists are going to claim, oh, this is going to show evolution. I'm telling you, they are already expressing a lot of problems. They're having problems with this, problems with that. We didn't expect this. But they're going to say, oh, we'll solve the problem, you see. They're going to stick to their evolution. But we have Dr. John Sanford on our staff, ICR. He was at Cornell University for 25 years. He published 70 papers in scientific journals. He had 25 patents. He was an evolutionist. But eventually he became disillusioned. What he studies is just so convinced him evolution was impossible. He's now on our staff, and he's published a book where he demonstrated, based on genetics, that things cannot get better. They absolutely, invariably go down. And we talk, everybody's worried about how species are becoming extinct. Oh, if we just do this, if we do that, we'll save them. Look, nothing is going to save all these species eventually. And these people are on our staff. And he could show that this so-called idea of mutation and natural selection cannot possibly have created what we have today. And even some of these evolution, like this Swedish scientist that I quoted, he just said evolution can't be true by the Darwinian evolution. He can't believe it. He knows it can't happen. And others have said, I could stand here and quote numerous articles out of the scientific literature where these scientists are saying Darwinism is a failure. Darwin is wrong. And now, the majority, of course, will argue against that. But these are evolutionists too. They never say the same thing we do. I'll tell you one thing. I am predicting that our research on DNA, on the human genome and so forth, is going to come right down real hard on the creationist position. Let me, for example, here, I have it's a very interesting thing. Let me mention here that I have a paper here which tells us that these scientists published this article. They had discovered, all scientists had discovered, at least 130 DNA genes, repair genes. 130 DNA repair genes in the human. That means there's 130 genes in our bodies that are coding for the enzymes and so forth. 130 of these things to repair DNA. DNA is so easily broken down and destroyed that we have to have 130 of these DNA genes that code for things that will prevent this destruction of DNA. And one of these elements, you know what one of? Water. Water will break up DNA. And they said so. This is one of the agents that will destroy DNA. Oh, man, these people who believed that life evolved had to evolve in water. The DNA couldn't survive. And they said this: if it weren't for those repair genes, life could not exist. Well, those DNA repair genes are DNA. You have to have DNA before you have DNA, because you have to have these things that would preserve DNA to protect it and repair it. But that's DNA itself, you see. It's just amazing. Then there's some incredibly complex things. I can't take the time to describe it. Just incredibly complex things. You know, in a little bacterium, it's just absolutely unbelievably complex. You have all this DNA and mitochondrial DNA and all these other kinds of DNA and everything else. And you have systems for delivering products, other systems for doing this, and systems for this, and all this. And then you have this incredible membrane and all that is so incredibly complex. To believe that put itself together like something floating around in the water on the earth is absolutely, it's almost insanity what they believe and that sort of thing. Now, so there's a lot of work going on the DNA. Our people are collecting samples of mitochondrial DNA from all kinds of people, and they're working on it, and it's going to come out some very important results. Yes?
Neanderthal, I know it's a Christian, I don't know the author, but there is a guy out there that's written a book on Neanderthal, and he has come to find out that the Neanderthal may be people that lived 150 to 350 plus years by the study of their teeth and their bone structure in their head. And I thought maybe you might know who that is.
Dr. Cuomo.
Dr.
Yeah, he's
how's that spelled?
Dr. Cuomo. He's a doctor, works on your teeth. Okay. He's an expert in that area. And he went to European laboratories. They let him come in with a portable X-ray machine, and he X-rayed these creatures. And he showed, you see, that the way that they had actually moved. When you're chewing on very tough food, that these people were eating, you get a different result than what we eat, you know, when all the stuff we eat is so soft. And it caused them to shift and that would account for it. Yes, Dr. Cuomo.
Cuozo.
Cuomo.
Cuozo.
Oh, Cuozo.
Cuozo. Cuozo.
Cuozo. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, that's
Yes.
good. Thank you.
Yes.
Mathematics has always seemed to parallel physics very closely and often revealing physical processes that were not suspected until the mathematics was worked out. And now we're hearing possibly the mathematical equations that where something pops up out of nowhere. Have you been exposed to that?
Well,
Possibly using that as the origin of
yeah.
the universe.
That's, come on, I know what that's called. Well,
Punctuated graduate?
no, it's something to give rise to the universe. It's, what do they call that kind of science?
Quantum physics?
What is it? Quantum mechanics, thank you. Quantum mechanics. You know, in quantum mechanics, anything can happen. I mean, it's the craziest things you ever heard of. Here, they believe the universe started with something the size of an electron. And it just popped up and it inflated and then it blew up and created the universe. I tell you, and they have to invent cold, dark matter. They have to invent cold, dark energy. They can't find it, they can't see it, but oh, it's got to be there, or things wouldn't work. And one of these scientists said years ago, you only should have one tooth fairy in this field. You only allowed one tooth fairy. Well, he's going on 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 tooth fairies. It's amazing. I'm telling you what these people, and there's just almost hundreds of variations of these theories, but that's what they say the universe started. I mean, you can believe anything. Now, what they've discovered is this. There's a number of physical what do I want to say? Something... Constants, thank you. You know, when you get older, there's 3 things that happen to you. First thing, you lose your memory. The second thing that happens to you is, I can't remember what those other 2 things are. Thank you very much. Yeah, now what were we talking about here? Yeah, quantum mechanics, and so forth and so on. And they invent this imaginary stuff and claim, oh, these great scientists, oh, they're the wizards, you know. It's all coming out of here, right here. That's where it's coming from. It's not what we can see. Because of these fixed constants, there's, maybe 20 or more constants. What we have discovered, those physical constants must be exactly what they are. They can't be a little bit less or a little bit more. You calculate the probability of just one being exactly right coming out of some big bang, and the probability is essentially nil. But 2, 4, 10, 20, probability is essentially 0. Well, they say this is the way we get around it. There was an infinite number of tries, and we're the one that made it. So it was an infinite number of tries, and so it was infinitely impossible, and yet, you know, it happened. That's the kind of science that we have from these people today. It's terrible. Yes?
Where do you stand on carbon dating?
Where do I stand on carbon dating? Let me explain, first of all, that we don't use carbon-14. Nobody uses carbon-14 to date archaeological, the rocks or the dates of the Earth or anything like that. The half-life of carbon-14 is only 5,730 years. Much, much, much too short to date something that's supposed to be millions of years old. Now, you use carbon-14 to date archaeological objects. They're trying to date something like Neanderthal man. They think they can make it go back to 50,000 years. I don't believe that for a minute. And I know one thing, the Neanderthal man is not going to be there in the ground for 50,000 years and have much of it worth dating, and so forth. But what they use to date the Earth and so forth is rubidium, strontium, uranium, lead, and other dating systems. And you use that. Now, if those assumptions are correct, you got a problem to date the Earth as old as it is today. In our viewpoint, it's not that old. But what are the assumptions? Assumption number one, decay rates have always been constant. Well, that may be so, but actually there's some evidence that it isn't in cases. But that's the assumption. You have to assume the clock has always gone at the same rate. Second assumption, when you have a rock in the earth and you date it, you get an age for it. If it's correct, you have to assume that that rock sat in that ground for millions of years. Say you dated it 740 million years old. You have to assume it sat in the ground for 740 million years with nothing entering the rock and nothing leaving the rock. But that's highly unlikely. But things will move in and out of rocks. Furthermore, you have to assume that when that molten material coming up through the mouth of the earth solidified, didn't have any lead in it from uranium decay or these other breakdown, so-called daughter products. But that's not true. There is these so-called daughter products in these things that could, when on the very time that it came out, it could have a very old age. Now our people are dating rocks from the Grand Canyon, comparing things that are supposed to have been the same age, and they're getting discrepancy in the hundreds of millions of years and so forth and so on. And they have evidence that the decay rates have not always been constant. I can't describe it, but some of this material was actually enclosed in diamonds, which are so hard, nothing gets in and out, and it was preserved in there, and it showed that the decay rate of uranium had to be very, very faster in the past than today. There's a lot of research going on there. Our people are working on this problem. We are young Earth creationists. Now there are a lot of old Earth creationists. I don't know how to put billions of years into the book of Genesis. I don't know how to put 200,000 years from Adam down to Christ. I don't know how to do that. I can't do that. Read the Bible. And so when you speak of the days of creation, those days are 24-hour days, which is the word yom in the Bible, in the book of Genesis. Genesis 1 speaks of day 1, day 2, day 3, and the morning and the evening, so forth. Those were in every place else in the Bible where the word yom for day is modified by either morning or evening or first, second, or third time, always means a 24-hour day. So, we believe very definitely in a 24-hour day. And when we get to heaven, if I'm wrong, we'll apologize.
How old do you date the Earth?
Somewhere between 6,000 and 12,000 years, something like that. And it's possible. I mean, do you know? You see, they used to say the Grand Canyon was cut by the Colorado River. Well, you still see books with that in it. Geologists who know anything about the Grand Canyon know that that's not true. That area was uplifted, they said, 60 million years ago. They're dating the beginning of the Colorado River now at around 4 million years. Why, if they uplifted there 50 or 60 million years ago and the Colorado River come along, it wouldn't go up over and cut down over their side and cut a canyon, it'd go right around it. It couldn't possibly. And there's, I believe, our geologists believe there were huge lakes to the east and so forth that were left over a whole huge lot of water. The natural dam broke and came through there and cut that canyon in a very short space of time, just like it happened at Mount St. Helens. about 3 years after that first creation. Yes?
What's your position on global warming?
Frankly, I'm very, very skeptical. There is something to be gained by these guys. They're going to get a lot of money, a huge amount of money. Going to go to all these people that are going to work on this and so forth and so on. And there's something to be gained there. In fact, as I heard not long ago where this fellow who doesn't believe in it said, now wait a minute. The level of the ocean has not risen at all for a long time. If you go measure how far the depth of the ocean, it hasn't increased. And so there is such a questionable thing. I say, now wait a minute. Let's just wait 500 years and find out. And we'll have the answer, then we can pass some new laws and everything else like that. But this, when Al Gore got something, say, oh, it's a catastrophe right now. We got to do it right now. If we don't do it, I think that's frankly baloney. Yeah.
Have you found any fossils that are not well behaved and they don't get in the right geological column and they get a little older than they're supposed to?
Oh, yes. He's asked whether there's some fossils that are not in the right place. The older is on top of the younger. There's many examples of that. Now, geologists, these evolutionary geologists, have to scheme up to, well, maybe there was some water in between, was slipped, and the whole thing just slid over it, you know. You take a block, something that's 30, let's say it's 300 miles long and 40 miles wide, and try to shove it today, it's just going to shatter. And so they have to come up with some kind of story on that. Yes, there's certainly evidence. And another thing they have is polystrate trees and others, where trees are through several layers, different deposits. And suppose those deposits are laid down over hundreds of thousands or millions of years. How could that tree survive for all those millions of years, for all that thing to be done? To go through several layers of time. And that's evidence. That's good evidence. Yes.
I was looking at your website, and it said if evolution is if evolution is true, it should be happening now. But the evolutionists would say that species to species evolution has been observed in the plant species called Trilobites or something, and it's split into T. mirus and T. miscellus. What do you say about that?
We say the latter part of that I heard about evolution is still occurring. What was the example? Can you speak louder?
Yeah, sure. That there was an example of species to species evolution in the plant species called Trilobites, which split into two new species called T. mirus and T. miscellus.
I'm not sure. I'm not referring to some of these things, but I'll tell you one thing. No one has ever seen an origin of a species by natural selection. Nobody's ever seen it. I tell you, they're telling you something different. That it's not true. And even some of these evolutionists say that. Goldschmidt will say no one has ever seen this happen. Colin Patterson, a scientist I quoted, he says no one has ever got even close to something like that, where you can see an origin of a new species by natural selection. You just there's nothing like that. There's nothing like that. I don't know what they're telling you, but I'd have to see the literature, and I just know what many scientists are saying. Well, they say, of course. Theodore Dobzhansky, world famous evolution, he says, of course. We don't see these things happening. It doesn't happen within our lifetime or many lifetimes. It takes a long time for these things to take place. Yeah, well, let's wait around 100,000 years and see if they really do happen. No, I don't know of anything really of that kind. I'd have to see the article or whatever to comment on it, really. I know there may be things like this. These evolutionists are anxious to claim a lot of things. They are, I tell you, our evolutionists are getting very discouraged. They are saying, what is happening here? We are failing. We are not doing a good job of teaching evolution. Look at all these creationists. They said even about 1/3 of their biology teachers are creationists. Of the biology teachers. And all these Stokes and others that are becoming creationists. And the repeated polls show that almost 50% of the American people believe that everything happened just as described in the Bible. That's 50%. And they say, oh, they're a bunch of ignorant people, you know. They are discouraged, and they have said so in some of their journals, that they're just doing a lousy job of teaching evolution. They got to do better than that, so forth and so on. Another thing that's been happening here in this last year or two, we see these articles suddenly appear on the front page of newspapers. Oh, some exciting discovery by evolutionists. Oh, how important this is. I think what evolutionists are doing is that we get these a bunch of articles out, send them to newspapers, tell them to put it on the front page and push these things to try to convince everybody that evolution is true. Well, I tell you, some of these things I know are not proving anything. You know, the finches and Darwin's finches, they're in the Galapagos Islands, they interbreed. They produce fertile offspring. And they're all finches from beginning to end. And the peppered moths in England went from light colored to dark colored. Oh, that was the most astounding example of evolution ever seen by man. But they're still peppered moths. They haven't become bumblebees and mosquitoes or anything like that. And they're going to teach our kids that here we have proof of evolution. Not evolution at all. Just variation within the species and within the kind. The dogs, 200 varieties of dogs, but they're all dogs. And the dog will interbreed on occasion with coyotes and with jackals and with wolves. And they produce fertile offspring. What does that mean? That is a created kind. They're a created kind. They're still dogs, you see, essentially dogs. Well, we'll take a few more questions. Yeah.
With dinosaurs, with dinosaurs, the age of the Earth, the evolutionists say dinosaurs have been around 200 million years.
Yes, they say they originated about 250 million years ago, somewhere in there, 230, 240, 250 million years. They became extinct 65 million years ago because of an asteroid that struck the Earth. I think that's a lousy theory because they say that that destroyed every dinosaur over the entire Earth, and they were up the Arctic and down in the Antarctic. We have fossils of dinosaurs at the Arctic and Antarctic and all over the world. Some were big, some were little, some were meat eaters, some were plant eaters, and all this sort of thing. And they said every one of them got killed. Well, why in the world did the birds become extinct? How did the little fluttering bird survive this huge catastrophe? How did mammals survive? How did all kinds of reptiles and others survive? And all these things. See, I think they have a lousy theory. We believe that they became distinct following the flood. It's a great, you know, they're finding now, drilling down there in the Arctic, down 400 feet. They brought up that material and said it shows that the temperature, average temperature there was 74 degrees. And many evidence says, whoa, you find fossil dinosaurs up there. It's obvious that the temperature was very different. The climate was very, very different at that time. And I've read articles by geologists who said we don't know why we had a worldwide mild climate. Why? Well, I'll tell you why. Because we had, before the flood, we had more water vapor in the atmosphere. The Bible says it rained hard for 40 days and 40 nights. Can't do that today. You have rain over the entire surface of the earth for 40 days and 40 nights? No, because you can only get about 2.5 inches of rain over the entire earth. So there had to be more water vapor in the atmosphere before the flood than there is today. these three gases, water vapor, carbon dioxide, and ozone, absorb the heat from the sun and retain it. And water vapor is by far the most important. If you had more water vapor in the atmosphere before the flood, that would have given the Earth a worldwide mild climate. And would the reason why we have these creatures there. Then, the time of the flood, most of that rain material came down, and only a fraction of it returned to the atmosphere under present conditions. So we have some, I think, a lot better explanation for that. Well, it's almost 9:30, and I'd like to get to bed before 11 o'clock. Maybe you would too.